Here's how a Glock 34 taught me how to master a Blaser R8 hunting rig. But before we get started, let's first do some myth busting. Did anyone ever tell you you have to pull the trigger with the soft tip of your finger? That might be right, or it might be wrong, because this piece of advice ignores the underlying principles for a good trigger pull. And here's how my bog standard Glock 34 reminded me of, or even emphasized that principle. But what's so bad about it? Well, one of the main complaints is the length of the trigger pull. Because the correct trigger pull means pulling the trigger straight back without disturbing the sights. The longer the trigger pull, the greater opportunity you have to pull the trigger sideways. And if you pull your trigger sideways, you push your gun, you push your sights off target, and you move your point of impact. And that's why you've got to pull the trigger straight back without disturbing the sights. The question is, how do you do it? It was when answering that question that my Glock 34 taught me an important lesson. There's a lot of trigger pull right here, but what matters the most is the point where the trigger breaks. That's the point where I must pull the trigger straight back without disturbing the sights. So here's the challenge with the trigger pull. You've got to pull the trigger straight back, but your finger moves in a curve. And somewhere along that curve, the trigger will break. Imagine the trigger broke up here, I'd be pushing sideways. If the trigger broke here, I'd be pushing pretty much straight back. And down here, I'd be pushing sideways from the other side. Those examples are slightly exaggerated, but the principles apply. So where on that curve your finger meets the trigger break is determined by two things: the length of your finger and your hand, and where you hold your pistol or your rifle. We'll get to the hunting rifle, but let's stick with the Glock as an example. The trigger on my Glock breaks here, and if I was going to use the soft tip of my finger and optimize for the point where my finger is moving straight back on the trigger, I have to move my hand down here, which is a fair bit. So when I can't change where I grip the pistol, I've got to change where I put my finger on the trigger. And the same goes for my hunting rifle. I can't change the position of my hand, and it doesn't come with the trigger that moves back or forth. And although it's less pronounced for my hunting rifle, I still need to move my finger further in on the trigger to make sure I pull it straight back at the point where it breaks. So remember, when it comes to shooting, many of the traditional rules might not apply to you because of the way your body is built and because of the way your rifle is shaped. And for trigger pull, you don't need to use a specific point in your finger, as long as you make sure you pull the trigger straight back where the trigger breaks.